Later this year, Ontario will become only the third province to bring casino gambling directly into people's homes. All you need is internet access to have a government-regulated casino at your fingertips. It seems the allure of millions in revenue was too great to pass up. The latest province to cash in promises the gambling will be carefully controlled and as safe as possible. But as Alan Carter reports, that is a bet some aren't willing to wager.
We are poker.
Slick ads promise an online world of unimaginable adventure. In the virtual casinos, you're surrounded by beautiful people, lots of drama, and you may even get very, very rich. But there's something these ads don't tell you: the casualties of online gambling, like this Toronto man we'll call Danny.
It's all bullshit, it's all fake, it's all phony.
How did you feel when you would eventually turn off the computer?
Remorseful, guilty, sick, confused, eager to get back on, so I didn't have to feel those things.
Danny is one of the more than 300,000 compulsive gamblers in Canada, and there are another 1 million people at risk. Danny's particular addiction was online poker, and there was a lot to choose from, an estimated 2,000 internet gambling sites that generate billions of dollars in revenue. It's a fantasy without limits and few restrictions. Danny was able to play until he lost everything: his money, his family, his job, and his self-esteem. It was like living in a bubble.
I didn't care. I didn't care if it meant I was going to never see my kids again or go to jail.
Online gambling sites operate on the edge of Canadian law, the so-called gray market. But with big money at stake, it's not just gamblers who find the lure of online casinos impossible to resist. Cash-strapped governments want a cut of the winnings too. They just don't want the problems that come with it.
When people go bankrupt, it's actually not good for us from a business perspective.
Paul Pellizzari directs social policy for the Ontario Lottery and Gaming Corporation. His job is to make sure that gambling, including online poker, is as safe as possible.
The important thing here, though, is building in gambling's version of safety belts and airbags, because there is risk associated with gambling. But if we have tools in place that allow people to control their own play, we reduce the risk and we're able to prevent problems and get people to help when they need it.
Gambling expert Roger Horbay isn't so sure those precautions will make a difference.
You can have all the safeguards you want on the OLG sites. It's not going to stop problem gambling.
By some estimates, a third of all gambling revenue comes from problem gamblers, and that adds up to an astonishing $4 billion into government coffers every year. Horbay says government-regulated online gambling, with its promise of controls, could actually make the problem worse by driving even more people to the unregulated sites.
What happens when governments get into it is participation rates usually skyrocket because it's now legal, so to speak. But what happens is when you stimulate the market and new players start going online, they don't necessarily go to the legal sites.
For now, online gambling isn't proving to be a government windfall. British Columbia and Quebec have only made a small penetration into the online market since they started their virtual casinos 2 years ago. One reason, according to Horbay, government-run sites just aren't as sophisticated.
Other countries that are licensing and regulating internet gambling are finding it hard to compete with the illegal operators.
That has addiction researcher Kevin Harrigan worried about how far governments will have to go to attract gamblers.
They've got to market heavily, they've got to have the newest and greatest games, they've got to make it easy to use your credit card or whatever to wager.
That easy wagering can lead to trouble. A Swedish study in 2006 found that a quarter of all online poker players have a gambling problem.
What was it about online gambling that grabbed you?
I could do it from almost anywhere. I could do it sitting at my desk at work. I could do it when other people were sleeping. It was really accessible. It was really easy to do.
People still are coming to casinos. It's just that the growth is stopped and revenues are flat. In fact, the average age of a casino gambler is now over 50. which is why the industry says it needs to be more customer-focused. That's another way of saying it needs younger people to come to the slots and to the gaming tables, whether or not it's at a place like this or online.
This younger generation has grown up in a culture that is inundated and obsessed with gambling.
Jennifer Evers is a strategist with Decode, a Toronto agency that researches trends among young people.
Our research suggests that gambling is actually not on the radar of parents and young people themselves, the same way that, say, drunk driving or drug use would be.
The risk might be below the radar, but online gambling isn't. An explosion of interest fueled by events like this. A 23-year-old college dropout from Montreal, Jonathan Duhamel, winning the nearly $9 million first prize in the 2010 World Series of Poker. Duhamel is the typical new age gambler, male, in his 20s, playing mostly online.
All the screens that we have at our disposal, be it a TV screen, a computer screen, an iPad, or a smartphone, those are all potential tables or gambling means. And that increased amount of access also increases the risk. There are infinite possibilities and opportunities for people of any age to gamble online.
Next on 16 by 9, the crack cocaine of gambling.
You come here to see something, right? Block out the outside world and get lost in the machine.
Is the government cashing in on addiction?
Friday night at a casino near Toronto. The incessant music of 2,000 slot machines and nearly every seat is taken. 16 by 9 came here to learn more about the allure of slots, games you can already find online.
For me, one of my biggest triggers was the music.
Our guide is a recovering slots addict who wanted to remain anonymous. He hasn't played a machine in months, but he remembers the feeling well.
Some of these machines have volume control, so they must be set at lower volume. If it was me, I'd be set it at the highest possible. Just to immerse me in the game and take me away.
But up and down these aisles, there are other triggers. Among them, the promise of a reward that may come at any time or not at all.
The human species has created a fantastically complex environment for itself.
Years ago, this man, B.F. Skinner, showed that in some ways, pigeons and people are much alike.
What we call the variable ratio schedule, and that is at the heart of all gambling devices and has the same effect. A pigeon can become a pathological gambler just as a person can.
The biggest thing about slot machines is how often you're being rewarded.
Gambling researcher Kevin Harrigan of Waterloo, Ontario, says all too often those rewards are really losses, made to look like wins.
When you win, or the machine indicates or celebrates a win, very often that win is not in fact a win. So for example, you may wager $2 and win 40 cents, which is a loss of $1.60. And the machine celebrates this as a win with fancy graphics and nice sounds. It's quite incredible. A player will experience those about 160 times in an hour.
Harrigan measures the heart rate and perspiration of gamblers to show that often we can't distinguish between a real win and a false win. Our physical reactions are the same. In the end, we become conditioned by this constant reinforcement, just like those pigeons in a box. Do this long enough and many gamblers stop reacting altogether, even when they do win big. This slot machine player has just won a $10,000 jackpot. His reaction? A bored shrug.
Whatever.
But the biggest jackpot is the $13.7 billion that goes into government coffers from gambling every year in Canada. More than we spend on books, magazines, and movies combined. And a big chunk of that cash comes from slots.
For the general problem gambler, it's all about suppressing emotion. You come here to feel nothing, right? To block out the outside world and get lost in the machine.
Jason Applebaum was lost in the machines for nearly 10 years. He started as a casino employee and ended up a slot machine junkie.
There were times when if I wasn't employed by the gambling business in Ontario, I would have picked up my chair and just destroyed the machine because I just was so sick of, what it turned me into.
Jason has printouts of his daily losses, totaling over $100,000, along with photos of himself at 12 in Las Vegas, and with his dad, a man whose funeral in Florida he almost missed because of his addiction.
On final approach to Fort Lauderdale, you fly over Hard Rock Hotel and Casino. And I just remember looking out the window as we flew over to the casino, just wanting to, go to the casino and not have to deal with anything. With, being there for my family, have to deal with the death of my dad. That's what the disease is.
Jason beat his addiction by learning all he could about the insidious technology of slots and this, tying on his skates again and getting back into his first love, hockey. But he still has vivid flashbacks of his addiction, reinforcing his belief that government-run online gambling is a bad idea.
It's very dangerous because now you're going to have people who are gambling at home that no one's going to know about. No one's going to know that they've been playing for 60 hours straight, that they're not eating. And I know the government wants money, that's why they're jumping into it, but I don't think they've done their homework.
Danny found his way back too. He did it with the help of Gamblers Anonymous. He says if he's learned one thing from his experience, it's that no one is safe.
You're a smart guy, educated, family, good background. Happened to you, can happen to anybody.
Absolutely. It's indiscriminate. Really. It could happen, and it does happen to everyone.
Next on 16 by 9, this is the Canadian safety standard for helmets.
It's going to save brains, it's going to save lives.
So why can't you buy one?
The casualties of online gambling, like this Toronto man we'll call Danny.
It's all bullshit, it's all fake, it's all phony.
How did you feel when you would eventually turn off the computer?
Remorseful, guilty, sick, confused, eager to get back.
Later this year, Ontario will become only the third province to bring casino gambling directly into people's homes. All you need is internet access to have a government-regulated casino at your fingertips. It seems the allure of millions in revenue was too great to pass.
Slick ads promise an online world of unimaginable adventure. In the virtual casinos, you're surrounded by beautiful people, lots of drama, and you may even get very, very rich. But there's something these ads don't tell you.
What's up? The latest province to cash in promises the gambling will be carefully controlled and as safe as possible. But as Alan Carter reports, that is a bet some aren't willing to wager.
We are poker.
Back on, so I didn't have to feel those things.
Danny is one of the more than 300,000 compulsive gamblers in Canada, and there are another 1 million people at risk. Danny's particular addiction was online poker, and there was a lot to choose from. An estimated 2,000 internet gambling